Are you new to the animal agriculture industry and want to speak the language of your customers with confidence? Get ready because starting September 3rd, we're launching our brand new poultry lingo course. Whether you're in sales, support, or simply stepping into the poultry world for the first time, this course is designed to give you the real-world vocabulary and industry insight you need. The course includes 3 focused modules: hatchery, layers and breeders, and meet birds, each just 4 weeks long, with live, interactive sessions every Wednesday. Learn directly from experts in a hybrid learning model that fits your busy schedule. You'll also hear from guest lecturers with practical experience in the field, and if you're a returning student or part of a corporate team, don't miss out on our exclusive discounts. And don't worry, swine folks, we're also launching a new session of our trusted and proven swine lingo course at the same time. Spots fill quickly, so email us at technical@animistic.co to reserve yours today. Speak the language. Serve your customers. Start with lingo.
Well, welcome everybody. It's really exciting to have all 4 of us here from Animistic, the technical team, as well as Dr. Franklyn Zhu, if I'm saying that right, I hope so. Really excited to have everybody here, and it's really special to share across the world, and really excited to get to know you. Could you share a little bit about your background? Everybody on the podcast hopefully knows a little bit about us, but they definitely don't know about you. So take it away.
Yeah, sure. Really honored to be on this podcast, and thank you all for inviting me on here. And so my background is I am from China, grew up in China. I studied computer science at Yale, did my undergrad there, and then I worked in Silicon Valley for about 3 years doing software engineering and data science. And in 2020, COVID hit, and I was like, oh, I actually want to be a bit closer to my family. So I went back to China, and because I'd been abroad for so long, I was, considering like maybe, spending some time to get to know China a bit more. And so at that point, my dad, he had just retired. So he was the former CEO of Conti, China. I don't know if Conti is still active in the feed industry in the US, but it's the Continental Grain Company. And he was their head of technical and also CEO for like 30 years. And he had just retired. He was like, Franklyn, if you want to get to know China, you should take a look at agriculture. That's a very traditional industry. There may be opportunities there. And instead of staying in tech, get to know the real China. And so he made an introduction to one of his friends at agriculture private equity firm. I guess this was like a nepotism internship. I'm certain I could have gotten like a real job, like a market driven job. But anyways, this private equity firm was under Wen's, and Wen's is one of the largest swine companies in China. And we invested specifically in agriculture. So we looked, upstream and downstream. So upstream, all the inputs, veterinary medicine, feed, additives, and then downstream, we looked at food processing and brands and all that stuff. And during my time there, you guys can probably cut out some of the stuff if it's.
No, we enjoy hearing about it. It's really interesting. I mean, your family, it's so interesting having your family involvement, and you guys have such a holistic view of agriculture, taking everything into account, it sounds like, from the beginning all the way to the end. Really.
So I started from the investment perspective, and at that point, the key investment thesis was consolidation, right? You had companies like Wen's and Muyuan, some of the top players, really expanding their production capacity. And so the upstream inputs, that if you get one of those large customers, then your sales would really go through the roof.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thesis. And we invested in about 7 different companies, from vet medicine to additives to even insect feed, black soldier.
So the feed that's feeding the insects?
No, we like.
Or insect protein.
Insect production. The feed that feed insects was like upcycled food and all that stuff.
Yeah,
So
that's a very a hot thing right now, and alternative proteins and stuff like that.
yeah,
So
but the unit economics, it's hard for it to really make sense.
yeah.
Yeah, that's the tricky part. How to,
Mhm.
we had to dissociate the buzz from the stuff that actually made money. And I guess a few key takeaways from those 3 years doing investment. First is that innovation is really hard, and it's hard to go from a trial to actual large scale production and decreasing the cost. And that we saw that in black soldier fly, we saw that in the kind of fermentation based biotechnologies. Um, I think to this day it's been hard to find a single agricultural you know innovation that's really saved a lot of money and made a lot of money for the innovator.
Yeah, the input costs into insect protein, Daniel's told me about it, Dr. Daniel Adams, the input cost into insect protein and setting up a whole new company, it's just so high. And then the cost, even though maybe people think insect protein is a better alternative, is cheaper, but those initial investments, maybe Daniel could add a little bit more, but the initial investments are higher.
Yeah, happy to dive into that. That's a very interesting topic. So back to that.
Well, I see a Daniel Franklyn talking about bug production.
I'm so happy to talk about it. I was very much involved in that deal and with a lot of bug facilities. But okay, I'll wrap it up. And then, so after 3 years of investment, to leave and then started a company with my dad focused on animal nutrition. And our initial starting point was piglet milk replacer. So whereas I think the premix and even the creep feed segment in China is relatively transparent now, I think with milk replacers there still is a bit of a technical edge. So we started there, and currently our customers include some of the largest companies in China, and we just do the milk replacer stuff. And at the same time, so I came from a data science background, and so for another type of service that we offer to our customers is just dynamic nutrition. So based off the average feed intake and their nutritional requirements, we help them set up their entire data analytics infrastructure and adjust the formula maybe every 1 week or 2 weeks dynamically to ensure that we're minimizing the waste. So that's another part of, I think a pretty exciting part of our work.
That's why you say you're interested in me doing simulation modeling, because that's literally what I do. I take all the inputs, predict outputs, or have desired outputs, predict those inputs, reduce different objectives, reduce waste, improve feed conversion, I don't know, longevity, or there's just endless objectives, and there's so many ways you can look at it. So it's really interesting you speaking about data science, but you've kind of applied that to agriculture. So that's really cool that you have, your family history and all those things. But what I want to know is, how did your upbringing shape your view of swine and poultry nutrition? You speak about all this data inputs and outputs and all that science, but I want to know, how did it shape your view, having your family involved or your upbringing?
Yeah. So, growing up, I never really knew what my dad did. I just knew he made something related to pig feed. And, it wasn't exactly the most sexy business. So, when I went to college, I had no interest in studying agriculture. So I studied, the sexy thing at the time, computer science. And Silicon Valley was, where all the cool kids went. So I decided to go to Silicon Valley. But then when I came back to China and I looked at, this industry, Chinese tech companies are notorious for their 996 work hours, and the pay wasn't that great. So I decided to give agriculture a try. And so when I actually got into agriculture, I realized, hey, this is such a huge industry, an important industry.
And there's a lot more data science, mathematics than you realize.
Yeah, there is. And also the starting point is kind of low. Like there's so much data that is not being used. Like people
I call it data in a drawer. People have it but don't use it.
Yeah. Sorry, what did you call it? Data what?
Data in a drawer. Like
Data in a
you put it in the drawer, you forget about it.
Oh, in a drawer. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and everyone is like, competing on input costs where they really should just be, managing their data a bit better, and you'll get significantly higher cost reductions.
Yeah, we just had another podcast episode with a Zimbabwean pork producer, and basically his edge, Philip, he says he manages his farm so well. It's not a new farm, nothing special about it, but he manages his data and is proactive and things like that. And I think that's really what gives him the edge, is knowing his data and reacting to it.
Yeah. But it's shocking, I think, how little data literacy there is in this industry. Like if you want to collect the growth weights and everything, just hire one more person. Just focus on that one thing. To your overall P&L, it's not that much of an impact. But it's, I think, shocking how few people in this industry are willing to even make that investment. But the companies who do, like Wuyuan, right? So big. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question about the
Yes, it does.
Yeah. And so,
I was just going to say, I know you talked a little bit about traditions and such, but I was curious if there have been any turning points in your career, or like times where you could see changes, like generational changes in the pork industry in China. I know you mentioned like the work hours and things like that. Have you seen any shifts in the industry since you've been working in it?
Shifts in the industry. I mean, the biggest one we're seeing right now is, talent is pretty hard to find, increasingly hard to find, because in the pork industry in China, we just went through, a couple of years of African swine flu, and you kind of have to stay in the pig farm for like at least 3 to 6 months. So I think that's one of the biggest shifts that are happening from like the people perspective. Fewer and fewer young people want to enter this industry. Yeah, that's one. Is that what you were asking about, like more from the industry perspective?
Yeah, just kind of any general trends that you've seen shift since you started, or maybe what you saw as a kid from the industry that might be different now.
Yeah, I think the biggest change in the industry is actually it went from being a like supplier dominated industry now to a customer dominated industry. There used to be, back in the 90s and early 2000s, people would line up for the formulated feed because you were transitioning from using food waste and just random, grains to using formulated feed. So it was a huge growth market. And so everyone made a lot of money. But then you enter like the 2010s and especially in the 2020s, it's totally overcapacity, and the customers got bigger, and the relative position of the suppliers to the customers just completely reversed. I think that is the biggest trend shaping the industry right now. Yeah.
I have a question for you on trends. Being the tech guy, obviously you've been involved in Silicon Valley. What is the technology investment into agriculture in China right now?
Yeah, the biggest investments have been in smart facility. Like the biggest investments have just been in modern facilities, and I think the level of automation, like we're not talking about robotic automation, but like environmental automation, like that's very common. We're looking at some pretty modern production facilities all around China. Yeah, at least at the sow farm level and the large company level. But there is still a very large segment of the market that's dominated by pretty old facilities, mainly in the finishing. So like I think sow wise, it's very modern, but finishing wise, the large companies have good facilities, but most of the market is still pretty primitive, and they don't have the capital to invest in really great finishing. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, is there anything specifically related to poultry that because I know you do a little bit of that as well, any trends that you're seeing in that industry that might be a little bit different than what you've seen on the swine side? Or is it all they kind of mirror each other?
Yeah, I think they do mirror each other. Like you just have huge amounts of capex going into each of these segments. So swine is like the big players in swine are essentially already set. A lot of capital went into this industry since African swine flu because the companies that survived ASF made a killing. And so we had all this capital from real estate going in here, building the most modern facilities. And now we're seeing the same thing in egg layers. Swine is no longer that profitable. And so in egg layers, you had 3 years of pretty good profits over the in the past 5 years. 3 of them very profitable. And so now you have all these ultra modern million egg layer facilities, popping up left and right. They're all big Dutchmen or big herdsmen. And I think we're going to see a pretty similar situation in egg layer versus the swine industry, where you have just massive overcapacity, and you're going to have these. A lot of these companies are going to go bankrupt, and then So.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey, listeners, real quick before we dive back in. If you're nodding along thinking, I've had this exact same issue on my farm or in my business, then now's the time to check out Nobi. Nobi is the step-by-step visual SOP tool that's making training easier across swine barns, poultry houses, Feed Mill 7, your living room television setup.ca. It's affordable, just $3 per user. Month, accessible, even offline, and adaptable to every part of your operation from onboarding to compliance. I've personally used it, and I can tell you it's as easy as posting on WhatsApp. So whether you manage a team or just want to stop repeating yourself, give Nobi a try. Use our affiliate link in the show notes to get started today. You'll support the real P3 and maybe save yourself a few headaches too.
Now, with the layer industry, is there any consumer demand to move away from battery cages into open housing, or is it all these operations for a million birds strictly kind of the traditional battery cage model?
They're all battery cages. The cage-free movement is very, very small in China.
Why do you think that is?
I think I think the biggest reason would be just the average level of consumption. The amount of money that the Chinese consumer has is a lot lower than in the West. That's one part of it. When you kind of don't have the extra money to care about the cage-free stuff. Second, the amount of marketing. There's a lot less sound, like there's a lot less publicity coming from these NGOs about cage-free marketing. So consumers are a bit less aware of it. And number 3 is also that I think the level of consolidation at the retail level is actually very important. And it's only when you have these super large chains that say, hey, my consumers are really, calling for this stuff, that they have enough volume to force the upstream livestock producers to change their practices. But in China, the retail segment is very fragmented. Most of the eggs are still sold at these farmers markets, but we're not talking about the fancy US farmers markets. These are like, actual farmers markets.
Like a flea market.
Yeah, like a flea market. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when you have most of the industry like that. And in the flea markets, it's like individual stalls. You don't have enough leverage to tell your upstream producers to do anything. So I think these are the three factors behind why the cage-free thing is.
With the focus being so much on economics, you speak so much about like inputs and outputs. How are companies navigating ingredient pricing and availability? Are they focusing on optimizing or maximizing gain, or just are they looking at livability? Like what are they considering? But in all industries, poultry and swine. Are they?
Yeah, I think the broiler and swine industry is relatively more advanced. The egg layer industry is still a bit messy. And by advanced and messy, I mean, I think it's exactly that. Like, are they focusing on these metrics? You need to have a level of sophistication to really measure and define your strategy based off these metrics. I would say that the majority of producers in China are still operating at a let's just survive and wait for the commodity prices to increase level. Yeah, the majority.
Is there an interest in feed ingredient, like alternative feed ingredients, distillers grains, all those kind of things? Is that something that's common? I know it's more common in Europe than the US.
Alternative feed ingredients?
Yeah, just alternative feed ingredients.
Yeah, I mean, whatever's cheap. I just have Casey about that the other day about upcycled food ingredients. That's actually a key part of our strategy as well, to find more of these upcycled ingredients and to try to stabilize their quality. There's certainly a growing interest in that. However, I think relative to the US, it's a lot less regulated and it's a lot less stable. Because in the US, you have stuff like Darley Ingredients, right? They really, as I understand it, really stabilized the bakery mix stuff. But in China, it's still quite messy. A lot of it is being sold and in a somewhat shady perspective. So there's a lot less tracking, traceability. I think there's a growing interest, and the government, I think, will eventually crack down on this and make the whole upcycled food ingredients market a lot more legit.
Yeah, they kind of ruined it getting the truckloads of candy bars in.
What, the government, by regulating it, ruined it?
Yeah. We're supposed to eat it, but
I would love to know what their backpack thicknesses and carcass quality was like. That would be.
I don't remember. I just remember stealing the candy bars from the bakery.
Yeah. The interesting also about you talk about the back fat and the carcass quality. I think that only happens when you have that whole traceability thing happening. Like in China, most of the producers sell to these pig traders. So they front the cash for the pigs, and then they will deliver the pigs to whatever slaughterhouse with the most money. It could be cross provinces, right? It could be anyway. So the producers right now just don't have that data, from the breeding stock all the way to the carcass quality. You got to be pretty integrated for that. And I know that Wu Yuan is really starting to do that, and I think they will become the first player that actually really implements that. I don't think Wen's can really do it. But I heard that in the US and Europe, some companies have actually really nailed that. Is that actually true?
Yeah, I mean, traceability is so important in optimizing and knowing what you're feeding your pigs, knowing if it's working, knowing your feed additives. I think it's vital.
We don't have Casey's secret or wish list of blockchain traceability to where I envision someday pigs can do it. I don't think chickens can, but you can scan a pork chop, a store, and know exactly the history of that pork chop and the carbon emissions by that pig. But You know,
I don't know if it could be done to a pig basis, maybe a barn or, a batch.
yeah, I was working on it.
One step at a time. One step at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know you talked a little bit about the vet med side of things. Are you seeing, talking about trends again, is there any push at all for dropping the use of antibiotics or anything like that? Or are they pretty widely used in the Chinese market?
Yeah, absolutely. There was a very big push to limit antibiotic usage by the government, and it's banned in feeds. It is banned in feeds, so you cannot put it directly in, commercial feed. However, it is still allowed, at the producer level. But antibiotics is a huge issue in China. I'll give you egg layers, for example. One of the most premier chains of supermarkets in China is called Hema. It's owned by Alibaba. And they have these antibiotic-free, cage-free eggs. And just earlier this year, it was revealed that, they have antibiotics in them. And I was talking with this French, expert. You guys might know him, Vincent Gouillonnet. He's based in Canada, I think. And I was saying, Vincent, how are you guys able to, actually make it antibiotic free? What's your secret sauce? And he just says, well, we just don't have as many diseases, right? We have better management. And then I realized that actually makes total sense because, one of my clients is one of the largest layers in Hubei province. And I go in there and they have all the beautiful big Dutchman stuff, all the facilities, all the antibacterial stuff, but the SOPs are not strictly adhered to, right? And it's a management issue, and so they have to, the egg layer market.
It's
really
treatment versus prevention, and I think treatment is always more expensive than prevention.
Yeah, but we're talking about multi-million layer companies that don't even have a financial statement, so they can't even quantify the cost of a lot of these things, and they don't have the management capability to really prevent it, and so they'll use a lot of antibiotics because they cannot afford to lose their chickens or to experience this level of.
I also think it ties back to the traceability piece also, because if you can't trace those eggs back to a specific producer, then why wouldn't the producer use antibiotics, You're
so right. The way they do it nowadays, it's like the sheds where they pump them full of antibiotics. They just send them over to the farmer's market because that's not traceable. And then for the ones, right, the antibiotic-free ones, they just, change the shed. Oh, that one's not, doesn't have antibiotics. Let's send them to the supermarket chain. That's why there's a huge, huge trust issue in food safety in China right now. And sometimes maybe it's better not to know this, but once you know it, it's I'm never shopping at the at the janky farmers markets again, because what's going into there. All the bad eggs are going into there. I mean, the total percentage, I hope, is still quite low, but that's where things are right now.
Well, you made a comment before we started because you're, where am I located? In home of Walmart. You said Sam's Club is just doing a phenomenal job in China. How has that influenced food safety and traceability? Because they have a pretty stringent, process here in the United States.
Yeah. I think Sam's Club has actually made a real contribution to food safety in China. I would make such a statement like that. They entered China in the early 2000s, and I think they have a couple hundred stores now. The revenue hit, I think, 10 billion RMB last year. And they have been a gold standard in the traceability and the food quality. And because of their business success, it's forced a lot of other Chinese chains to adopt similar levels of food quality, right? So, I think they just set the standard on a lot of things, and they showed the Chinese supermarkets that you could make a great profit doing this as well. Yeah.
It's great that they're not, Sam's Club is maybe not pushing the small producers out, but kind of making everyone realize that they kind of need to do better and be better. And so it's kind of pushing innovation in that way, hopefully.
I was talking about it's showing the other chains, restaurant chains.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, they work with some of the larger producers,
Mm-hmm.
probably the largest producers, because as we said earlier, the mechanism of why you're able to provide the antibiotic-free stuff is because you have enough scale and you have enough channels to push the other stuff away.
I see. Yeah. Okay.
Maybe that's a bit too real, but it's actually how it's working in the industry right now.
And what else what can small producers and large producers, what can they do to kind of like maintain that economic edge? You spoke right in the beginning, you spoke about like premixes, creek feed, but you said milk replacer was kind of where you started, and you said that China still has the edge, and that had me intrigued. What did you mean by that?
What I mean by that is I think a lot of people, a lot of producers kind of don't quite understand like how to formulate a milk replacer. I think in the U.S. and Europe, it's generally quite transparent at this point. But a lot of feed mills don't know how to do that, and they're still using a lot of like expired milk powder, human milk powder or whatever milk powder, and they're not even balancing it for the amino acids. There's way too low of a CE level, and a lot of producers are not familiar with the concept of like milk protein and how important that is. So that's what I mean. Yeah, but we're talking about like regional feed mills who, maybe they don't even have a nutritionist. Like their formulas were just copied from somewhere, or some college, local college professor probably provided them with it, and they've never changed it since. So that's what I mean. And yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes, yeah, it does.
I was curious, and I know Chantel mentioned this a little bit earlier. Do you feel like, specifically in the poultry sector, are any poultry producers using things like essential oils or acidifiers or phytogenics, those kind of like novel feed additives to try to boost their performance? Because really, if they see the added performance boost, they should kind of buy into some of the feed additives, but I don't know if you're seeing that.
Yeah. Feed additives have been, like they've been very popular for many decades, and a lot of producers did buy into that. But I'd say not because they saw a statistically significant, change in the growth, although that's part of it. Maybe this again is too real, but a lot of it is about the customer relationship, or about like the because I think the animal nutrition side of things in China, there's lower hanging fruit. Like maybe in the West, it's already quite optimized and the nutritionists all know what they're doing. But for a lot of producers, you're taking like a standard textbook formula that might not even be completely balanced, right? And so the while it may be stat sig, the effect size of the additives, might not be as visible.
Yeah, I think it's a long process, and a lot of times you have to try a lot of different things to find, or combine lots of different feed additives to see a boost in either performance or health. Like you're not going to find one essential oil that really changes your response to a disease challenge, but it's usually the combination, and that can be difficult to get buy-in on because it takes a lot.
Yeah, endless trials. And it's also very fierce competition. You have the key is you have so many alternatives. So why this one versus that one? And so at this point, it's also become a bit of a race to the bottom. Now I know a lot of larger companies, if the total kilogram cost is over the equivalent of $15 per kilogram, then we won't even consider it. So that's for feed additives, functional feed additives nowadays. So, right.
Did you say $15 a kilogram
Yeah,
for the product or per treated ton?
per product. Like they'll ignore the ton level. They just say keep it under. If anything is overpriced, priced above that, then look, I have all these other alternatives that say they have effect. So keep it under 50 RMB per kilo. Yeah. And the typical functional budget that these companies might be about maybe like 100 to 150 RMB per ton, and that translates to about $20 per ton for the feed additives. Yeah, that's
I would
swine.
say on some diets it may, be higher than what it is in the U.S. We may look at, higher budget nursery diets, but not, or like starter diets and poultry, but nothing. Be hard pressed in my mind. But I guess, is that including amino acids and enzymes, or
No, that's not. We're talking pure functional. And yes, this is more on I'd say, the starter and the small pig diet. In the larger ones, you're not going to be,
Well, with that big of a budget and the openness to use it, how do they get their information and knowledge? And you said it's relationship driven on that trust. So, I mean, where is that coming from? How do you build trust? How do you get that knowledge out?
Yeah, I think this is the biggest challenge that the feed additives industry is facing in China, because there can be a lot of like snake oil kind of a vibe to this, and there can also be a lot of commercial bribery, So there's been a crackdown on that in the past few years, especially as the industry has become a lot more competitive. When you had fat margins, you'll use whatever, it's fine. And especially if your procurement officers skim a little off the top, it's okay. But now there's, been a ruthless drive to cutting costs. And I think the way that the industry is working now, the feed additives industry, it's got to be someone who's already reputable and trusted, and they'll just do endless trials. They'll do maybe like 2, 3, 4 trials to test your additive, and if it works, then they might consider using it. But the margins are going to be a lot lower nowadays than they were maybe even just 5 years ago.
Now, I was working with a pet client from China that wanted a product supplement made in the US or Europe because he used it as competition. Do you see any advantages of that for, feed additives or technologies coming outside of China to be used? I mean, cost-wise, it's still probably going to be cheaper to source within China.
Oh, you're saying imported additives and, whether they're competitive in China? I think there will certainly be a credibility advantage, especially if the large players in the US are already using it. And yeah, I think there's a lot of distrust in the Chinese market for local suppliers, because they'll just think, oh, are you even adding enough of the active compound in there? Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
I'm going to go down another touchy topic.
Yeah.
If you can't answer it, you can't answer it. But what is the word on the street in China about the lysine dumping lawsuit and issues? Has that come into any of your news or talk in your circles in China?
Actually, no, I haven't paid too much attention to this. Yeah. I can find out. Interesting. Yeah. You can tell me more about that later.
No. Yeah. I don't know. No comment.
Lysine dumping issues.
Yeah.
Are you talking about like Chinese producers dumping lysine? I mean, that's sounds like a broader trend, not limited to lysine. Eh? Yeah, there's just too much capacity in China for everything. Um, yeah, it's, that's it's a bigger topic. That's tough. Yeah, and actually, I talked a little bit about why that's happened. Obviously, it's happened in all countries, like, U.S., Japan, whatever. When you went from manufacturing-based economies, eventually transitioning to service economies. Although whether that logic still applies, I don't know, but that's another question for the economists. In China, like the capex issue is especially pronounced because there's a lot of like state-driven or local provincial government-driven subsidies and what we call 招商引资, which is you invite these factories or producing companies with huge subsidies to build more factories, and it brings up the local GDP, right? And which is part of each province's KPI. They don't care as much about profit, but they care about GDP. And if there's a factory being built, the whole upstream inputs that all counts into your GDP. And so this kind of mechanism has just led to a massive overproduction. And now, actually, the government, one of the biggest key messages this year is about anti-involution. They call it involution is just essentially like race to the bottom, endless subsidies and endless price wars. So the government is fully aware of this and is really trying to control this. So specific actions like in the swine industry, they're saying, okay, guys, let's we need to decrease the amount of capacity now, and they just launched this policy to prevent secondary finishing. I don't know if that's a thing in the U.S., but they'll sell the pigs at standard market weight, and then these other guys will come in here and buy those pigs, and then continue feeding them until they're maybe like double standard market weight, and then sell it based off where hog prices are, and so you have a just kind of like a screwed up supply side. And the government's cracking down on these practices to make the market a bit more rational and less like a Las Vegas casino.
No, I don't think we could double the weight on our pigs.
Maybe not double, but yeah.
Profitable too.
So I'm curious, I guess, kind of rounding us out. How do you think the Chinese swine and poultry industry views the U.S. at the moment? And then what are our opportunities for the U.S. and the Chinese to collaborate over the next 5 to 10 years? What do you think that looks like?
Well, the current and previous points of collaboration were soybeans until that happened, and then and breeding stock, right? Mm-hmm. I guess some additives, and I guess certainly imported meat. So you can go down those. I mean, the soybean thing, that's a larger issue, geopolitical issue. There's a switch to Brazilian and Argentinian. But U.S. soybeans, as I understand, like the word on street is still better and cheaper. So, if the geopolitical tensions ease, I'm sure, that'll come back, but maybe not to the prior levels because, they'd have to hedge it.
And I guess kind of you were saying earlier that there was a little bit more credibility from U.S. feed additive companies. Do you feel like that might start to dwindle as well, or do you still see that being pretty strong?
I think the credibility will still be there and it'll be on par with the European additive companies. However, the feed additive industry itself is facing tremendous issues in China, challenges. So, I don't think the credibility has fallen. It's just the industry's gotten smaller.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to wrap this up and say thank you. We have a whole a bunch more episodes planned with Franklyn. We were just talking about how we're going to sit down and model out profitability and price and inputs and things into our production systems and see how they compare in the US versus China. We have tons of ideas to kind of bridge this gap and open the doors, because not like all of our political statements here in the US, American agriculture needs China. And I'm hopefully opening the door that we can continue to communicate and collaborate and grow together.
Yeah.
And I'd rather see you guys as partners than, in a trade war. So I would hope that door is always open for us to keep collaborating in agriculture, because there's so much value both countries bring to each other. So, Franklyn, it was great to have you. We appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you all.
I really enjoyed meeting you and speaking to you, and I look forward to future podcasts with you. I've a lot more to ask you, and I'm excited for the next one.
Yeah,
Great
cool.
day.
Hey, listener, before you head out, want more than just another vendor. At Animistic, we don't just follow the industry, we lead it. Whether it's developing innovative products, navigating regulatory hurdles like a boss, or delivering training that actually sticks for your people. Pet nutrition? We're on it. Livestock solutions? You bet. Data, strategy, science, heart? All day, every day. You'll catch us on the Real P3 podcast, Coffee in the Barn, and at animistic.co, where science meets soul. Subscribe to our founder, Dr. Casey Bradley's LinkedIn newsletter, Manifesting Innovation, and keep an eye on your favorite client channels. Yeah, that's probably us too. We're faith-based, fiercely committed, and full of science plus heart. Want to be featured, collaborate, or just have questions? Reach out technical at animistic.co. Animistic, faithfully serving through science plus heart.